Welcome, friends, to Breakfast in the Ruins, a Michael Moorcock-flavoured podcast. This show is an odd one. A while back, I was glancing over some of the old books that I still have that were given to me by Pops and my uncles, and thinking about what we could cover as one of our occasional breaks from Moorcock. I've been mulling over a bit of Sword and Planet action since Phil and I failed to cover the first Michael Caine volume, after two successive copies I had fell to bits each time I attempted to read them. I had considered Almeric by Robert E. Howard, and we have, of course, covered Danis, The Dark Straits of Reglathium. Hashtag fucking Danis, as our so far one and only one shit book episode. Check out that show for more info on the one shit book concept. I'd looked at the shelves and considered Lynn Carter's Callisto stories, a couple of which I still have, that made their way to me from Pops. But then it struck me. There is another Sword and Planet series out there that sold in the millions, ended up counting well over 30 volumes, and has a very curious and rather off reputation. So much so that the publishers of the later volumes in the series decided to step away, much to the chagrin of the author. Yes, we're talking about John Norman's GOR. Let's have a look at the entry from the enormous breeze block that is John Clute and John Grant's Encyclopedia of Fantasy. Norman, John, pseudonym of US academic and writer John Frederick Lang Jr., whose debut novel, Townsman of GOR, 1966, was the first of a lengthy planetary romance sequence. GOR is a world on the far side of our sun, and its barbarous slave-owning culture is continually supplied with manpower and, more significantly, woman power, shanghaied from Earth. The first book and its immediate sequels, Outlaw of GOR, 1967, and Priest Kings of GOR, 1968, are passable exercises in the Edgar Rice Burroughs mode, as are 4 and 5, Nomads of GOR, 1969, and Assassin of GOR, 1970. However, later volumes degenerate into extremely sexist sadomasochistic pornography involving the ritual humiliation of women, and as a result have caused widespread offence. Though deplored by critics, the series was popular, and its opening volumes inspired two obscure movies, GOR in 1987 by director Fritz Kirsch, and Outlaw of GOR, director John Cardos. In the early 1990s, John Norman attempted to relaunch his by-then stalled career with a new series, the Telnarian Histories, but this seems to have caused much less of a stir. Crikey. So, who on this earth was willing to travel to the Counter-Earth with me and take a look at the first instalment in this much-read, yet latterly derided series? Well, it's Miles. Unlucky Miles. I'm going to take a moment here to pop in a content warning. There are themes of sexual exploitation and slavery running through this book, and we do talk about them at some length. So, have a stiff libation, or at the very least a strong cuppa, or oil your neck joint by other means in advance of some head shaking, and join Miles and me as we travel by mysterious means to the Counter-Earth, and try and figure out not only what the fuck a townsman is, but more generally what the deal is with GOR. Here we are, back in Derry Toms, and Miles is back. Welcome back, Miles.
Thank you, Andy. Always a pleasure.
And we are here. Well, I'll tell us what we're here to do in a second. But first of all, how's Casual Trek going? What have you covered recently?
We actually recorded an episode yesterday where we were going over corrupt admirals in Starfleet. So we got to watch the first episode of Picard, season 3, where Picard is the bad admiral, and got to watch the one TNG which has Locke from Lost playing an admiral who was up to some shenanigans involving an old Romulan, a Federation attempt at a cloaking device.
Are there any original series corrupt admiral?
I think in that one, it's mostly corrupt bureaucrats.
Some of my favourite admirals are just dickhead admirals. Like, was it Jellicoe?
Jellicoe, yeah.
Jellicoe is probably my favourite guest Starfleet officer, just because he's such a massive prick, but generally right.
Yeah.
and Riker comes to begrudgingly respect him, even though he's a massive dickhead.
I've had bosses like that.
Yeah, I also love Ronnie Cox. If you've got Dick Jones as an admiral in Starfleet, you know, you're onto a winner, aren't you?
Yeah.
Just brilliant. But why on earth are we covering GOR? How did we get here?
I am surprised. I was sober. I wasn't sure about you when you were tweeting about GOR on Twitter.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure of your alcohol consumption level, but you set down a challenge. Someone had to be dumb enough to pick up the gauntlet and challenge back. And that idiot was me.
Yeah, I think I had in a brief moment of whether we call it weakness or insanity or anything else, or simple curiosity, I thought, we've got to look at Townsmen of GOR. And if I think back to when Pops was giving me books in the 80s, Townsmen of GOR fits right into the ballpark of Breakfast in the Ruins because I got the first 3 GOR books off Pops. Townsmen of GOR, Outlaw GOR, and I think Priest Kings of GOR. I read them in the 80s. When Pops gave me them, he had a twinkle in his eye. He liked them because he said they were a bit fruity. So, for a guy, I suppose, who at the time was in his 60s, in the 1980s, a bit of fruity fantasy didn't go amiss. I don't think he ever got past the first 3. If he had done, they would have come to me as well, and they never did. So I don't know what he would have made of them as they... Well, I think we know generally that they descended into more protracted philosophical ramblings that came close in some ways to being the 70s, 80s, 90s versions of an incel's charter, just with more body oil and hand-to-hand combat. But I've never read them all I know is them by reputation.
Yeah.
So I read those first 3 when I was a teenager, but my memories of them are very, very dim, beyond people these days rolling their eyes at the mention of the series. On the odd occasion, it drops into conversation on somewhere like Twitter, so I've never really given them much thought. But about 4 years, just before lockdown, about a month before lockdown, we were on holiday in Penzance in Cornwall, and we went in a second-hand bookshop, and there were 2 GOR novels, and I didn't own... My GOR novels are long gone. When I moved in with Phil, whenever it was, 15 years ago or more, and I had to get rid of 2/3 of my belongings in order to fit into her house, all the GOR books just went. I'd say the 3 that I had, they were amongst the ones that went. So I picked these 2 up. I think one of them's Priest Kings of GOR, and the other one is Captive of GOR, which, after looking into it in a brief conversation we had, is the story of a promiscuous, selfish earthwoman who gets taken to GOR and taught how to be a proper woman. Good Lord, we're not going to go down that route, although I did read a Goodreads review and it was quite hair-raising. But I picked up these books from this bookshop proprietor, and even as I took them to the till, he expressed his distaste for them and made me feel like I was a 15-year-old buying a copy of Razzle from a garage at 2 a.m. It was quite uncomfortable, but I thought, no, fuck it, I'm going to get them just in case, because, the podcast was, I think we were maybe only 3 or 4 months into the podcast, and I thought, maybe we'll look at a GOR book at some point. We had that conversation after doing the dark. We were thinking, what could we do next time we get together? And I said, how about GOR? And you said yes. So here we are.
So all I gotta say is go fool me.
Yeah. Boom. We need to try and fit in as many of those, whatever they are. My brain is fucking knackered. We need as many of those as possible. But let's very quickly talk about John Norman Lang, his full name, who wrote these. He's a professor of philosophy. He's 91, still around. And he's the second author that we've covered on Breakfast in the Ruins with a sideline in sex instruction manuals. But unlike Graham Masterton, I think he's only ever done one. And the description of it runs thus. Imaginative Sex is a non-fiction book by John Norman which includes a list of male-dominant, female-submissive, heterosexual, BDSM type, sexual fantasy scenarios and suggested guidelines as to how a couple can act them out in order to improve their sex life. Fair play. Let's not kink shame anybody.
No.
Weirdly, though, when I was looking at this, given that Norman has got a lot of grief for the GOR books in the last 20 years, and that includes being dropped by Ballantine, his publisher, his recommendations, in a way, are slightly quaint, especially when we think by post-50 Shades of Grey standards, modern standards. Because the outline continues, it says, in the book, Norman states that one of his goals as a writer is to allow people's imaginations to become sexually liberated. He encourages married couples to use sexual fantasies and role-playing in order to enliven their sex lives and explore the mental and spiritual aspects of sexual intercourse. While Norman defends his male-dominant, female-submissive psychosexual theories, it is notable that he does not advise couples to attempt to adopt the customs and institutions of the fictional planet GOR in any literal or simplistic way. Norman places more emphasis on pair bonding and stable heterosexual relationships than in the GOR books, and when fancy scenario whippings are to be enacted, for example, Norman recommends that the man sharply clap his hands together while the slave reacts as if being whipped. Oh, that's so quaint. Isn't it? That's incredibly lame.
It feels almost like he's just saying it for legal purposes. It's like the legal disclaimer at the end of like a film. It's like no similarities between real people were intended.
Yeah.
Please don't sue.
This brings us to the quite remarkable fact that apparently there is a Gorean subculture. And, of course, we'll talk about the first GOR book shortly, but this subculture does exist, and it's apparently worldwide. At least if you include Darlington as being in the world. And there was an article in The Guardian in 2006. The byline is, GOR Blimey, subservient cult is unleashed on Darlington. If shopkeepers in the suburbs of Darlington have been wondering why they were selling out of chains, candle wax and dog collars, they need wonder no longer. Residents living in the town, famous until now for railways and Quakers, have developed an unlikely penchant for a strange form of sexual domination prescribed in a series of science fiction novels written 4 decades ago. The practice has come to light after Durham police confirmed they had raided an address in Darlington after receiving a tip-off that a 29-year-old Canadian woman was being held against her will inside a house. They'd also received a complaint from a man in Essex concerned that his 18-year-old son had become involved in a quasi-medieval sect. When police called at the house, they found those participating in domination practices were doing so willingly and dropped the case. The Canadian woman had been trapped in Darlington, it transpired. Oh, of all the fates, trapped in Darlington because she had burned her passport. No offence to anybody in Darlington. No one is quite sure why the Cooooool sect, as it calls itself, had taken root in a pebble-dash street in the northeast. An offshoot of the Goreans, a larger group with some 25,000 British followers, they live their life according to commandments hidden within books by John Norman. In John Norman's fictional land of GOR, which is divided into castes, couples must ditch any pretense of equality and instead strive to achieve the master-slave dynamic in their relationships. Norman's 1960s teachings, which have spread through the internet, require the slave to be the female. As well as obeying the sexual commands of her male partner, she is also made to cook and clean. Now, this article does have the name of the gentleman in question, but I've redacted it. Maybe we should go with like the Simpsons thing, Mr. Black.
Mr. Black.
Mr. Black, 31, who lives at the address that was subject to police inquiries and describes himself as a master who trains slaves, told the Northern Echo, "It works on the system that some women have a desire to serve. Most people think it's a very sexual thing, but it's about every action they make. They do it for their master. I've been called sick, but I don't think what I do is bad. There's no reason for people to be afraid of me. I'd die before I see anyone get hurt. Saying that, the girls will do everything they're told when it comes to sex, but it's all voluntary and all safe. Lots of girls want to come and try to find out about it," he added. "They think it's exciting, but it's hard work for everyone. Girls leave when they've had enough." Although there are said to be 350 Goreans who meet in pubs and clubs around the northeast on a regular basis, not everyone has taken to the new fad, nor indeed to the man apparently leading Darlington's unlikely sexual revolution. The local butcher, for one, has banned Mr. Black from his premises for turning up with his girlfriend attached to a leash. Wow. Now, I've got to say, I laughed my fucking head off when I read that for the first time a few years ago. I thought the idea, and originally I thought it was a butcher in Darlington who was in the Gorean sect, but it had all mashed up in my head. And I do prefer the idea of it being a butcher in Darlington being in a Gorean sect.
I don't know. Just this must be the I grew up in Brighton for 30 years. I'm just looking at it and go, that's tame. It's bloody fucking tame.
Yeah. It is all rather quaint by modern standards.
As long as everyone involved is consenting, willing, and there are established boundaries and safe words, like, hey, let your flag fly.
I suppose the moral of that story is if you hear clapping coming from your neighbour's bedroom window, mind your own business and let them get the kink on.
Oh, yep.
So, I mean, I love the idea of them all like having pub nights as well. I mean, I guess you'd see them coming from all the leashes and stuff, and people on all fours. But what is it?
And all the clapping.
Yeah, what is it about these novels that inspire such maximum cosplay behaviour? Well, we've decided to find out, haven't we? The first thing we need to do, now of course, you're a little bit under the weather, so you're on the tea, but I decided that I needed to get an appropriately Gorean beer going for this, because it's 6:20 where I am. It's only midday where you are in Wisconsin, but the sun is well past the yard arm for me. And as we had a slight hiccup last week or a week or two ago when an audiobook company issued a copyright strike against us on YouTube and took down 2 of our videos, we thought, oh, well, I wonder if there are actually audiobooks of GOR. And you found that there are indeed GOR audiobooks on Audible in the erotica section. As this is this podcast's first foray into erotica, I thought, really, this requires some kind of wanker beer. Now, it's perfectly possible that folks think we generally tend to lean towards wankers beers on Breakfast in the Ruins anyway, and to some extent I agree. But on this occasion, it takes a particular brand of wankers beer. So for this occasion, I'm going with Carling Black Label.
Oh. The beer I only remember from the old 90s commercials.
Yeah.
The ones that clearly inspired by Excalibur.
Yeah, or the Dam Busters, or things like that. Yeah. My first instinct when I went to our local little supermarket to see what wankers beers they had was to go with John Smith's Bitter, but even I have standards. So I went with Carling. I'm really taking one for the team here, to be honest. While I pour this out, we're just going to have to get to it. What edition of Tarnsman of GOR, and we'll explain what a Tarnsman is when we get into it. What edition of Tarnsman of GOR are you working from?
I have got the Del Rey Ballantine edition. This is first edition, December 1967.
Oh.
But this is the 19th printing from March 1983 with some very nice Boris Vallejo cover art where he's still it looks like he's still kind of working the Frazetta style before going for his more own airbrushed.
The Boris Vallejo ones are quite saucy, aren't they? Lots of muscles and buttocks. Yeah. Well, mine, on the other hand, is a 1974 tandem edition, and I gotta say, it's pretty disappointing.
Oh.
There are no buttocks.
No.
There is no flesh on display. It's a guy with what is just beyond a basin cut in rather attractive blue smock with a bow on the back of a big bird, which we will find out is a tarn. So, yeah, it appears that from some of the slight research I did, because I didn't want to delve into this too deeply, because we just want to talk about this book, it appears that the original Ballantine editions, they had covers much like this, I think by the same artist. It was only when Ballantine realised that these books were a bit fruity, and the Frank Frazetta Conan covers started to appear, that thought, hang on about, we're missing a trick here. And this is where they started to get the Boris Vallejo covers in. And they resulted in a massive uptick in sales, because Frazetta had a massive impact on sales of Conan novels, naturally, and the Vallejo covers had a huge impact, and they flew off the shelves, even when people didn't know how fruity they were. So yeah, it was a big factor in them selling so well. Let's see what does the back of my book say. It says, Volume 1 of the Chronicles of Counter-Earth. Tal Cabot of Earth was the chosen one, picked out of millions to visit the magnificent planet of GOR, where great wild tarns scream across the sky, where the dreaded priest kings control the destinies of the warring races. There, on that strange world, so like yet so unlike his native earth, Tal Cabot was trained to the service of the priest kings, to be worthy of the high caste of warriors, to swear loyalty to his city, Korobar, and its sacred homestone. And there they ordered him on his mission to steal the homestone of the city of Ar, a mission that would bring him to almost certain death. Well, not that certain, because there's about 35 of these bloody books. And frankly, I hate to come up with a spoiler straight off the bat, but that makes it sound a lot more exciting than this book actually is.
My copy, they've definitely redone the blurb to kind of tie into much more racy cover.
Interesting.
The hidden world. Earth could never know of GOR, the world always on the opposite side of the sun. But GOR somehow knew about Earth, as Tal Cabot soon discovered. Taken by force to that savage world, Cabot was forced to become a Tansman, a warrior who could control the great warbirds of Koroba. GOR was a world of slaves and beautiful women, of human domination by the alien secret priest kings, and was also the world of Tarlena, tempestuous daughter of the great warlord of GOR. She waited for the man who could subdue her, the man who would be her master. But was Tal Cabot that man? Spoiler, yes. Yes, yes, he is.
Yeah.
As we'll find out at the very end of the book.
Yeah. That's a slightly more pulse-pounding description of the action, I think. Now, I think it starts briskly enough with chapter 1. Tal Cabot, our hero and narrator, explains his silly name, sort of. I don't know, something to do with conquistadors or something, I've forgotten already. His origins is from Bristol. It's from Bristol. And it gets very amusing later on in the book where he starts to announce himself as I am Tal of Bristol.
Bristol.
Yeah. He's got a job at an American university as a history professor. He gets a weird letter from his long-lost dad, then goes camping and ends up in a flying saucer. That's chapter 1. No messing around. No messing around. And then soon, chapter 2, boom. Well, he's on GOR with his long-lost dad. So that mystery is dispelled within about 2 pages. He's got his mysterious letter from his dad, and then boom, oh, it's his dad. Hello, I'm your dad.
His dad with a pleasure slave who he's quite willing to share.
Yeah. I think doesn't take long, does it?
Yeah, the most I've ever gotten from my dad has usually been like, I could borrow his Bob Dylan CDs.
Yeah. It certainly doesn't take long for the sexual politics of this book to rear their heads. And yeah, you're right. So quite apart from the fact that we've set up a mystery with a letter from his dad, and Norman has immediately blown his load by almost 2 pages later, his dad just being there. You know, there could have been some kind of mystery to this. Yeah, they could have.
Yeah,
we could have found out halfway through that his dad was one of these mysterious named characters. But no, it's his dad. He's right there. Boom. And he sat there talking to his dad. His dad says, "You need something to eat." He says he clapped his hands twice and the panel slid back again. I was startled. Through the opening came a young girl, somewhat younger than myself, with blonde hair bound back. She wore a sleeveless garment of diagonal stripes, the brief skirt of which terminated some inches above her knees. She was barefoot, and as her eyes shyly met mine, I saw they were blue and deferential. My eye suddenly noted her one piece of jewellery, a light steel-like band she wore as a collar. As quickly as she come, she departed. "You may have her this evening if you wish," said my father, who had scarcely seemed to notice the girl. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I said no. Yeah, get used to it, Tal. Oh, wait, he does, really quickly.
he does. Even though he spends a good deal of his time going, oh, not sure if I condone the slavery aspect of this planet, but I'm all for it.
What we get now is so much boring exposition. It's pages and pages and pages of exposition. When you get other, because this is essentially, we'll talk about what Sword and Planet is, but this is essentially a Sword and Planet fantasy novel.
Yeah.
Generally, when you get these things, people are catapulted into a strange world, and then, like with John Carter, he is in peril straight away. In this, he turns up, his dad's like, all right, do you want to shag this bird? No? Okay, let's have something to eat. By the way, I'm going to send you to a teacher, and you're going to spend weeks learning loads of really dry politics about the world of GOR. You're going to think it's brilliant, but it's going to bore the readers absolutely shitless. GOR, he said, is the name of this world. In all the languages of this planet, the word means homestone. He paused, noting my lack of comprehension. Homestone, he repeated. Simply that. In peasant villages on this world, he continued, each hut was originally built around a flat stone, which was placed in the centre of the circular dwelling. It was carved with a family sign and was called the homestone. It was, so to speak, a symbol of sovereignty. Change the channel, Marge. They just go, yeah, so he really loves these homestones, and apparently Tal is going to get with it too. And so more exposition. GOR is the counter-earth. Women are property. So far, of course, we're prepared to uncover a bit of dodge in this, and this is the first indication of what's come, but it's early days. There are priest kings with advanced technologies that hang out in the mountains, in the sacred place, TM, Everybody really digs homestones. All the cities have their own homestones. And several pages of exposition later, if you're still awake, we can discuss any kind of precursors for a Sword and Planet, because really it's a John Carter knockoff, isn't it?
Yeah, you can tell this is written by a professor.
Yeah.
Because it just reads like a non-fictional history book in so many places, and much to its detriment.
Yeah, he has a terrible tendency to slip into, I don't know what you want to call it, world building, with some of the descriptions that go on for fucking ages about really minor things that don't add anything to the plot but just slow it down. And when you think about the precursors for that, I mean, what have we got? John Carter, obviously, but before that, I think Gulliver Jones predated John Carter, I think, didn't he?
Yeah.
We've got Almeric by Robert Howard, Flash Gordon, of course, and then rough contemporaries, Moorcock's Kane stories, probably, they do predate this by 5 or 6 years. Lynn Carter's Callisto stories. By the 70s, you've got fucking Danis, Mike Sirota. There's lots and lots of examples.
You got like Lee Brackett and the sort of Rhiannon.
Of course, yeah. So it has all the hallmarks of these Sword and Planet novels, but it's so dry. There's very little drama, very little tension, very few hijinks, no exciting descriptions of clobber, although there are a couple of amusing references to why GOR clobber differs from our own, one of which made me laugh out loud. We get a super boring explanation of the Pythagorean counter-earth theory of Philolaus, which goes on forever. It's like, fucking hell, sure don't tell.
Yeah.
And actually, having a counter-earth story is one of the few things in this that's interesting and probably more original, because the only other counter-earth story, counter-earth, of course, being there's an opposite version of Earth on the far side of the sun that rotates at the same speed, so we can never see it. We don't know it's there, and people occasionally realise it's there. Like in there's a movie called Journey to the Far Side of the Sun. I think it was a Jerry Anderson production. It was one of their first.
It's a Jerry Anderson film.
Yeah, it's actually that's a bit dull, but it's pretty good. And all the model work is great. It's got Roy Finnis out of The Invaders in it. It's actually pretty good. I loved it as a kid. And the movement of other bodies are affected by the gravity of this other thing, even the cat see it. The only other thing I can think of is Gamera versus Gorean, the big sword-headed monster. Gorean was from the Counter-Earth. But there's not a whole lot of Counter-Earth stuff out there. So
I think there's one in like the Marvel Universe, because that's where Adam Warlock, the Elrican space knockoff, is originally from.
Right, okay. Now, I understand Adam Warlock actually pops up in the new Guardians of the Galaxy film. That's not something I'm really familiar with.
Yeah, it's if you're looking for the character as he is in like the Jim Starlin, the stories which are the most clearly Elric inspired, you're gonna be as disappointed as I was, because he's kind of adult in this film, which is a shame. But I enjoyed the film overall, even if hashtag not my Warlock.
Sorry, I just drank some Carling Black Label, and it is.
Are you okay? You need a little lie down?
It's disgraceful, frankly. I can only say that this is maybe beer for people who don't like beer. So, fortunately, I brought up a can of Thatcher's, so I'm going to make a snake bite to try and make it palatable. I'll just pop that in there. So, yeah, chapter 3, we meet Tom, his teacher, who basically takes him to school, and again, it's really, really boring. We meet Tarns, and this is one of the confusions I had, is he's called Tal, and the birds are called Tarns. And whenever I was thinking, if I'm going to be speaking sentences, I'm going to get them mixed up and get them the wrong way around.
His teacher's called Tom.
Yep. We've got Tom, we've got Tal, we've got older Tal, we've got Tarns. Actually, the introduction to Tom, his teacher, is quite nice and descriptive, but then we descend back into pages and pages of exposition, and world detail. It's so boring. We even get a page explaining the workings of a translation machine, which we don't need to know. All we need to know is there's a translation machine.
Yep.
So, but essentially, you can sum up what we learn in that chapter. They've got a caste system, there's slaves, there's outlaws, there's priest kings. The leaders of cities are called Ugars, and there's some bad dude who wants to be the Ugar of all Ugars. And there's got this system of society which is painstakingly described, where if people do certain things, they become. It's so fucking boring. It's so boring. But finally, when it comes to the Tarns, Cabot actually finally faces a bit of peril. And this book is called Tarnsman of GOR, so finally we'll get to some tarns in chapter 4. So it's really super exciting because he's got to tame a wild tarn. And it's the first time he's faced any peril, and we're over 50 pages into this fucking fantasy book. And all he's been doing so far is sitting around listening to his dad explain the philosophies of why women are either natural slaves or unnatural slaves. And it's really painful. The tarn is guided by virtue of a throat strap, to which are attached, normally, 6 leather streamers, or reins, which are fixed in a metal ring on the forward portion of the saddle. The reins are of different colours, but one learns them by ring position and not colour. Each of the reins attaches to a small ring on the throat strap. The rings are spaced evenly. Accordingly, the mechanics are simple. One draws on the streamer, or rein, which is attached to the ring, most nearly approximating the direction in which one wishes to go. For example, to land or lose altitude, one uses the fore strap, which exerts pressure on the fore ring, which is located beneath the throat of the tarn. To rise in flight or gain altitude, one draws on the one strap, which exerts pressure on the one ring, which is located on the back of the tarn's neck. The throat strap rings, corresponding to the position of the reins on the main saddle ring, are numbered in a clockwise fashion. Like, fucking hell. I'm getting flashbacks to Favor in Danus, the 3-page description of a sport that makes no sense. It is so tedious. It's so much unnecessary filler.
This reads to me. Speaking of someone who's dabbled in like fantasy writing, this is someone who did all the world building and went, fuck it. I spent weeks coming up with how to ride a tarn, and you are going to get all my workings out.
Yeah, and even then, he's not. He explains also that the 1 strap, the 2 strap, the 3 strap, and everything else are all different colours, but they're not referred to by the colours.
Well, they're
referred to as the 1 strap, the 2 strap, or the 3 strap. Why not the red strap or the blue strap? I'm not having it. I'm not having it, John Norman. This tedious explanation adds absolutely nothing, and there are so many. And even at this early stage, it's obvious that if you get rid of them, this book would be a brisk 70-page Sword and Planet novella and still wouldn't be missing anything of note. There's so much padding in it. It's crazy. And of course, to John Norman, this is probably all great stuff. You know, good luck to him. I'll say the same about him as I said about Mike Sirota. You know what? I've never had a book published. I've never written a book. He's sold gazillions of these fuckers. So good luck to him. But you know what? It's not for me. Anyway, him and his dad have a tarn race because he's conquered this tarn, and Tal doesn't think he can possibly win this tarn race. Tal on his tarn, because his dad is at least a pasang ahead. But he's the hero, so he wins anyway, prompting a rather amusing exchange where his dad says, "By the beards of the priest kings," roared the older Tal as he brought his bird to the roof. "That is a tarn of tarns." The tarns, released, winged their way back to the tarn cots, and the older Tal and I descended to my apartment. He was bursting with pride. "What a tarn," he marvelled. "I had a full pasang start, and yet you passed me." The pasang is a measure of distance on GOR, equivalent approximately to 0.7 of a mile. So a kilometre then?
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Cue more excruciatingly dry exposition about ubars and name conventions, and then boom, someone tries to assassinate him. Or his dad, it's not quite clear, and they fly off and get away. That's all handled. This little bit of action is handled in a fraction of the amount of text it took to explain how a tarn harness works, which is incredible. And then they get drunk, and Tal wakes, reflects on his boozy night, and, in particular, his first exposure to pleasure slaves. I wonder what he makes of pleasure slaves. Let's find out, shall we? I remember, too, the girls in the last tavern. If it was a tavern, lascivious in their dancing silks, pleasure slaves bred like animals, for passion. If there were natural slaves and natural free men, as the older Tal had insisted, those girls were natural slaves. It was impossible to conceive of them as other than they had been, but somewhere they too must be awakening painfully, struggling to their feet, needing to clean themselves. One in particular I remembered, young, her body like a cheetah, her black hair wild on her brown shoulders, the bangles on her ankles, their sound in the curtained alcove. I found the thought crossing my mind that I would like to have owned that one for more than the hour I had paid for. I shook the thought from my aching head, made an unsuccessful effort to muster a decent sense of shame, failed, and was belting my tunic when the older Tal entered the room. Well, there's quite a lot to unpack there, isn't there?
Can I ask you a question? Did you think that his dad was going to turn out to be the bad guy at the end of the book?
Yeah, I was hoping for something like that.
Yeah, because like all this, it feels like he's being indoctrinated into a cult,
Yeah,
which offends butchers in Darlington. But no,
we learn a lot here about Tal. On the one hand, he acknowledges. So he's looking at these slaves, these dancing girls, the one of which he's paying particular attention to appears to be a black girl. He's acknowledging his father's attitude that this girl in particular, he agrees with his father that she's a natural slave, right? Which is bad enough. The next thing is, he acknowledges that there'll be times when she will wake buggered. Sorry, I mean buggered in the Northern England sense, which is very, very tired, and aching from her exertions and having to, inverted commas, clean herself. And then his attitude to her is not only that he views her, well, yeah, Dad talked about some women being natural slaves. This girl's a natural slave. But despite the fact he's acknowledged that previous rather grim reality of the life of a sex slave, that he wishes he'd got more out of her than the hour he paid for.
yeah, I think it's a good thing that John Norman was around the 60s and not coming of age when Twitter was a thing.
Yeah, yeah. You can, even though these initial books aren't supposedly as explicit or problematic as some of the later ones, there's still so much going on in that chapter which reveals a really quite unpleasant attitude from the protagonist. And I think it's a problem with a lot of fantasy novels because attitudes of protagonists to sexual exploitation have been problematic in a lot of novels. Because, let's go back to the Frost Giant's daughter with Conan. He sees her in the snow, okay, it's delirious, but his absolute intention is to chase her down and rape her.
Yeah.
That's what Conan wants to do in the Frost Giant's daughter, is he sees a red-headed, beautiful frost giant woman, and his absolute intention is to chase her down and have his way with her. So it's always been a thing. But, even if we go to the 70s with the Thomas Covenant novels, which I tried to reread a couple of years ago, and because my auntie, Pops never gave me those, my auntie gave me those in the 80s. She read them, she really liked them. And I read the first one, and at the time, I don't think it really, when I'm reading it when I'm 15, I've got to say, I read the Thomas Covenant books. The second series I found too dry and boring, but I read the first series, and me and my mate at school, we read it, and it wasn't until I recommended it to my sister, and she almost threw it back at me and said, "What on earth have you recommended this to me for?" The hero rapes a teenage girl in the first few chapters, and that made me think, right, okay, here's I, as a 15-year-old lad, slightly missing a really obvious point here. And I picked them up. I picked up really, really nice hardback first editions in a charity shop. And really, really nice books. And I started reading it, and the protagonist, Thomas Covenant, one of his first actions when he gets to the land, as it's called, is the girl who shows him some kindness, who I think is supposed to be 14 or 15.
I think so. It's been a while since I've read the first trilogy.
Yeah, he feels filled with the vigour of the land and rapes her. And beyond that point, when he realises what he's done, he doesn't display shame. He's relieved when he comes into contact with her family that she's covered up for him and he's not going to get into bother about it. And I was, this is in the fucking bin for me now. And I've had a couple of conversations with people who really like the Thomas Covenant books, and they say, "Oh, well, you've got to keep, you've got to read the rest of the books. It's about a journey." There are certain things I just can't get past anymore.
There's something similar in his science fiction series, where there is some very graphic control and sexual abuse in the first book, and even if it's good, it's just like, nope, in the bin. It's just, it's
a case of just, it's pay your money, take your choice, isn't it? That's just not for me, I'm afraid. It's just not for me. And this is throwaway pulp at the end of the day. It's got no real kind of pretenses to be anything else, but the seeds of what's to come are definitely there in the Tal Cabot character. But next up, he gets sworn into the high caste of warriors. He's pretty smug and pleased with himself. Already he's ruminating and having opinions about which classes of people that are there at the council he doesn't think should even be there. Which is like, fucking calm down, Tal Cabot.
Tal, you've been there a week, mates.
Yeah. The Council of GOR give him a mission to steal the homestone of the enemy city of R, because their Ubar wants to be the Ubar of all Ubars or something, and we'll find out what that's all about. But he's like, has these kind of imperialist ambitions. So, okay, sure, whatever. Chapter 5, they outline the plan. Now, we've got to talk about this plan, which, to be fair to Tal Cabot, he doesn't agree with and doesn't carry out, but they've got this hilarious plan where they bring him a slave girl and they say, what you do is you fly to their tower. They call them cylinders, don't they? They call the big buildings in the city cylinders. You fly there, and then you take this slave girl, Sana, and you kidnap the Ubar's daughter, and you replace her with Sana, and then you take her away with the homestone, and they won't think anything's wrong, and that the daughter of Mel, whatever his face is there, what's his face? Malbinus? I can't remember. Marlenus, which sounds like a very feminine name, which is why it keeps on confusing me, because it sounds like Marlene. Monge to Marlene. Monge to Marlenus. Yeah.
All the lads remember Marlene.
Yeah. That's right. The idea is that she'll get caught and they'll impale her because she's an imposter. But then it's all right. You've got the homestone. You can then just kill the Ubar's daughter and toss her off your town and come back. So the plan entails killing the Ubar's daughter and leaving a slave to her death. But it doesn't go according to plan, of course, because Tal still has at least some moral standards. And so Sana, the slave, who wasn't a slave, then was, but now isn't, thanks to Tal, because she's so hot, she offers herself to him anyway, and he's like, whoa, swing. And then she asks at this point, why did you free me? My bride price would be 100 tans. I whistled softly to myself. My ex-slave would have come high. On a warrior's allowance, I would not have been able to afford her. If you wish to land, said Sana, apparently determined to see me compensated in some fashion, I will serve your pleasure. It occurred to me that there was at least one reply which she, bred in the honour codes of GOR, should understand. One reply that should silence her. Would you diminish the worth of my gift to you? I asked, feigning anger, because his gift is to set her free or something.
Yeah.
She thought for a moment and then gently kissed me on the lips. No, Tal Cabot of GOR, she said. But you well know that I could do nothing that would diminish the worth of your gift to me. Tal Cabot, I care for you. Yeah, that was quick. I realised that she had spoken to me as a free woman, using my name. I put my arms around her, sheltering her as well as I could from the swift, chilling blast of the wind. Then I thought to myself, 100 tans indeed. 40 perhaps, because she was a beauty. For 100 tans one might have the daughter of an administrator. For 1,000, perhaps even the daughter of the Ubar of R. 1,000 tans would make a formidable addition to the cavalry force of a Gorean warlord. Sana, collar or no, had the infuriating, endearing vanity of the young and beautiful of her sex. On the Tower of Thentis I left her, kissing her, removing from my neck her clinging hands. She was crying with all the incomprehensible absurdity of the female kind. I hauled the tarn aloft, waving back at the small figure still wearing the diagonally striped livery of the slave. Her white arm was lifted, and her blonde hair was swept behind her on the windy roof of the cylinder.
Tal Cabot, big head of GOR.
Yeah, he's really, really getting into this thing. It's always hard, isn't it? When you're reading a book, how much do you tie up the attitudes of the protagonist with the attitudes of the author? And if he's trying to make Tal appeal to the reader as a protagonist, this is making him appeal to a very specific kind of reader, I suppose. But I don't know.
It's not as if Tal ever kind of comes into, really kind of comes into conflict with what he feels compared to the society around him. Like, even though throughout the book he's just like, no, I think the slavery is wrong. I'm still gonna use the rules when it appeals to me.
Yes, well, that's another interesting thing, and we'll get to that. The slave caravan. Before we get to that, though, there is. They do the thing. He goes and kidnaps the Ubar's daughter, who's like this super tall, cloaked figure, He nicks the homestone. There's a mid-air fight as he's escaping. Once again, lacks viscerality and flavour in a way that I would expect from this kind of novel. And unfortunately, everything goes slightly wrong in the fight. He falls from his tarn because she outwits him, and she buggers off on his tarn, and he falls through the sky. But he lands in a big spider's web in chapter 6. And at last, we get a fun chapter. Actually, I think I've probably missed up the end of chapter 6 and chapter 7, but that's essentially what happens. We get a fun chapter, we get the heist, we get some beasties, and we get a cool spider with a mechanical voice box called Nah, that I want to be my friend.
The spider was the best character.
Absolutely. Best part of the book.
And then when he goes, I'm like, no, come back. I want Talking Spider of GOR.
Yeah. This is absolutely great. This spider is shrewd. He seems to have at least a slight sense of humour about things. He's friendly. He doesn't kill rational creatures. And Tal's like, oh shit, a giant spider. And he's like, hey, don't worry, brother. Everything's cool. I don't kill rational beings. What do you need? Let me help you out. And they catch the girl, which is quite convenient. She's elsewhere in the swamp, getting menaced by, what is a Thalarian, a big lizard beast.
Yeah.
The other thing that's amusing about this is Tal, an actual professor, keeps referring to the spider as an insect. I think he does it 3 times. Tal thinks that spiders are insects, so I'll let that slide though, because this is a great chapter, even though I might be overselling it somewhat, as I'm rating it as great after reading the previous 5 chapters. But I do like Nah the spider. Unfortunately, Nah the spider doesn't last long, as you pointed out. Nah the spider should have come back at the end. Now the spider should have been a running character through this book.
It should have been like the end of Tolkien, where like all the spiders come for the great battle.
For the big battle. Oh shit! We'll get to the big battle. What a disappointment that is. But yeah, absolutely. There should have been all his friends that he's made over the course of his adventures should all team up at the end.
All 2 of them.
Yeah,
all 2 of his friends. Meanwhile, Nah the spider has buggered off to a Colin Wilson novel.
Yeah. Although, of course, we do know that Now the spider won't kill rational creatures, so he couldn't really turn up at the end to...
Yeah.
But he could have turned up to do a bit of engineering or something.
A character of a moral code in a GOR novel.
Yeah.
And of course, he lasts 1 chapter.
Yeah. Yes, a shame. After he goes, we've got Tal and the Ubar's daughter, Tarlena. She gets hoity-toity. Then she gets demure. Then she stumbles into quicksand, so Tal saves her. Then she submits to him. Then she tries to stab him. So he's miffed and gets a bit stern with her, but stops short of doing anything abusive. Sadly, we find out that had she not been beautiful and regal, Tal might have raped her.
Our hero.
And in his mind, at John Norman's, it appears this is some kind of noble and heroic position to take. It's absolutely baffling. While we're listening to his musings, she annoys him, so he's like, right, I'm going to teach her a lesson. And he actually thinks to himself and to the reader, you know what, if she wants her beautiful, I would have raped her to teach her a lesson. It's like, fuck off, dude. What is going on?
Then I just want to quickly read a part because it comes back later.
Yeah.
When Marlena was kind of sassing him, then to my amazement, she stood up and regarded me contemptuously. If you had been a true warrior, she said, you would have taken me on the back of your tarn, above the clouds, even before we had passed the outermost ramparts of Har. And you would have thrown my robes to the streets below to show my people what had been the fate of the daughter of their Ubar. I think it's a good thing that Parliament doesn't follow those same rules.
Yeah, her attitude towards being submissive to him gets even more pronounced.
Yeah,
further on, and we'll get to that. But what is going on here? In his sex instruction book, apparently, there's an extract from that. When talking roleplay, John Norman Lang cautions that such games must be safe and consensual, and states that hurting and humiliating human beings genuinely and with malice is morally wrong. And he says rape, as a sociological reality, is commonly an ugly, brutal, unpleasant, sickening, horrifying, vicious act.
But when did imaginative sex come out?
I don't know, off the top of my head. I've no idea.
I
Maybe, I don't know. It's just,
have a look.
There's this sense that he views all of this as, obviously it's fantasy. Obviously it's escapism. But I guess it's just a form of escapism that I can't really buy into.
Like the book came out in 74, and this was originally published in the 66. I mean, I would like to give John Norman some benefit of the doubt. It's just after reading this, I really don't want to give John Norman the benefit or money of anything.
Yeah, there is a question of how far down the rabbit hole would one want to go in attempting to give him the benefit of the doubt and perhaps rehabilitate the reputation of these books. And the answer is, I really can't be asked because it's just not very good.
No, especially since like a lot of it, like the later ones in the books go into the idea that women naturally want to be submissive to men. It's just like you say one thing in one book about the nature of things, but then you have the entire series of books where you say the other thing.
Yeah.
It's not really, it doesn't match up.
Yeah. We've covered my experiences in the Third World War on this podcast, the four key stories, I suppose, from that, of this, where Moorcock puts us in the mind of an individual that engages in some extremely morally dubious activity certainly when it comes to sexual exploitation, as well as everything else. But Moorcock isn't at any point trying to swing the lead and make us think this guy is a hero. He's putting us in the head of a really damaged, fucked up individual, whereas John Norman is putting us in the head of his hero. And I'm afraid it doesn't work for me at all.
Like, especially to go back to Moorcock, he famously rewrote the ending of Gloriana.
That's right.
Because he felt that the final chapter was condoning rape when that wasn't his intention whatsoever.
Yeah, who was it who called him out on it? It was
I think it was Dworkin.
Yeah, Andrew Dworkin called him out on it, and he did the right thing at the end of the day, and he responded. He reread it from a female perspective, and was like, oh shit, yeah, you got a point here. And he rewrote that last chapter. Yeah, so fair play to him. So, I don't know. I mean, we know that the frame of reference for readers of this stuff when it was written differs markedly from today, whether we like it or not. But you can only really judge it on how you see it. And
yeah,
when it comes to that frame of reference, pop songs about shagging schoolgirls were on top of the pops in the 1980s with a band in the studio. All Night Long by Rainbow is about shagging schoolgirls. And of course at the time, Top of the Pops was actually being presented by at least one sexual deviant anyway. But fortunately, we're being spared any more of Tal Cabot's bizarre musings as they get captured by soldiers from R. And she's pretty pleased with this until, after confirming her identity, they clap her in irons and label her a slave. Because, as we find out in Chapter 8, her dad, the Ubar, Marlanus, on learning that the homestone had been nicked, took off with his loyal townsmen and the entire city treasury. So he and all his family have been condemned to be impaled on the walls. But Tal and Tarlena break free and do their captors in when the two R lads decide they fancy engaging in a bit of rape. And Tal's not having it, which would be fine if only a few pages earlier he hadn't told us that he would have raped her had she been plain. And then he's unhappy with her morality when she tells him she sends her slave to seduce dudes and get intelligence. I suppose we could consider Tal Cabot to be a bundle of contradictions, or is he just a fucking tool?
Fucking tool of GOR.
Yeah, tool of GOR.
Tool of GOR.
Yeah. Now, we're going to rattle through chapters 9, 10, and 11 really quickly and sum them up, because Tal and Tarlena are sort of mates now. We found out that on GOR they drive on the left, like Tal's native England, which he observes, to keep the sword arm towards the stranger. There are diseased folk that travel the land and are shunned, much like lepers, but it's not leprosy, it's darkosis, or something. I think it's darkosis. Will that come up again? Foreshadowing, perhaps? Yes, darkosis will come up again. Tarlena thinks he's a wimp for not shagging her when she's chained up. Tal is now going by the moniker Tal of Bristol, and once again, no offence to Bristolians, that sounds very unheroic fantasy. But Tal makes a new friend when he's challenged by a Farlarian rider for ownership of Tarlena and defeats him, but refuses to kill him, much to Tarlena's disgust, and they become BFFs. Like, within minutes, they become BFFs, and this dude, Kazrak of Port Car, happens to be the best swordsman in the caravan of Mintar, a corpulent merchant. This corpulent merchant, usually corpulent merchants in fantasy books are always villains, but this is a rare occasion where a fat merchant actually turns out to be not too bad. Apart from the fact, of course, if you ignore the fact, that he's running a massive slave caravan and he's off to sell hundreds of women in the slave markets at the City of Tents. The characters are so terrible in this that just because Mintar seems like an alright guy to hang out with, you start giving him breaks until you remember what his business is. But due to circumstances, Tal has to throw his lot in with this lot and put up with the fact that the caravan, taking hundreds of women to slave auctions in the City of Tents, the unscrupulous Mintar is trying to buy Tarlena off him. It's a tough arrangement, but Hero's got to do what Hero's got to do, and we get an insight into Tarn's feelings about all of this, about having to join a caravan, which is essentially a massive slave caravan. What does he make of all this? Well, the next few days were among the happiest of my life, as Tarlena and I became part of Mintar's slow, ample caravan, members of its graceful, interminable, colourful procession. It seemed the routine of the journey would never end, and I grew enamoured of the long line of wagons, each filled with various goods, those mysterious metals and gems, rolls of cloth, foodstuffs, wines, and pagar's booze apparently, weapons and harnesses, cosmetics and perfume, medicines and slaves. Oh, what a life. Mintar's caravan, like most, was harnessed long before dawn and travelled until the heat of the day. Camp would be made early in the afternoon. The beasts would be watered and fed, the guards set, the wagons secured, and the members of the caravan would turn to their cooking fires. In the evening, the strapmasters and warriors would amuse themselves with stories and songs, recounting their exploits, fictitious and otherwise, and bawling out their raucous harmonies under the influence of Pagar. And then he bangs on for ages about how he learns to ride Thalarians. It may not surprise listeners to learn that we get almost a full-page description of how Thalarian saddles, tack, and harness work. Epic fantasy. And Tal also, apparently, is getting a bit hopped up on slave ownership. And as a reader, you like to assume that when you're reading a section like the one that we're going to talk about, that Tal is playing a role to keep them both safe. But after 2 pages of humiliating her, abjectly humiliating her, and laughing at her with his new BFF, any evidence of that seems to be dispelled, and one really starts to accept now why some folks find these books pretty problematic. After showing her his new slave whip, this is just, I've got to laugh because it's so out of order. Oh, good God. Her next remark astonished me. "Use it on me if I do not please you, Tal of Bristol," she said. I pondered this, but she'd turned away. So previously, this is this arrogant, prideful daughter of an Ubar who's tried to kill him, everything else. In the next few days, to my surprise, Tarlena was buoyant, cheerful, and excited.
You missed the part where he makes her a collar engraved with the legend, "I am the property of Tal of Bristol."
Yep, that's right. And she digs this, apparently. She became interested in the caravan and would spend hours walking alongside the coloured wagons, sometimes hitching rides with the strapmasters, wheedling from them a piece of fruit or a sweetmeat. She even conversed delightedly with the inmates of the blue and yellow wagons, bringing them precious tidbits of camp news, teasing them as to how handsome their new masters would be. She became a favourite of the caravan. Once or twice, mounted warriors of the caravan had accosted her, but on reading her collar, had backed grumblingly away, enduring with good humour her jibes and taunts. In the early afternoon, when the caravan halted, she would help Kazrak and me set up our tent, and would then gather wood for a fire. She cooked for us, kneeling by the fire, her hair bound back so as not to catch the sparks, her face sweaty and intent on the piece of meat she was most likely burning. After the meal, she would clean and polish our gear, sitting on the tent carpet between us, chatting about the smell, pleasant, inconsequentialities of her day. Slavery apparently agrees with her, I remarked to Kazrak. I read that to myself in a Roger Moore accent. Not slavery, he smiled, and I puzzled as to the meaning of his remark. Tarlena blushed and lowered her face, rubbing vigorously on the leather of my Thalarian boots. Good God. So she's apparently submitting fully to this male fantasy now.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's going to get worse in the following chapter. At this point, I'm hoping dearly that Tarlena is just swinging the lead here and trying to pull one over on him. But even if she is, the attitude of our hero is fucking terrible. He's a dickhead and I don't like him. But it does get worse. Because when observing a slave market, we get to hear Tal's inner monologue again. So they're at a slave market. Talina is observing some women that she actually knows from R getting sold into slavery, and she's getting excited when some women are getting sold to nice owners, in inverted commas. She laughs when one of them gets sold to a fat bloke, and Tal thinks to himself, to my surprise, most of the girls seemed excited by their sale and displayed their charms with brazen gusto, each seeming to compete with the one before to bring a higher price. It was, of course, far more desirable to bring a high price, thereby guaranteeing that one's master would be well fixed. Accordingly, the girls did their best to move the interest of the buyers. I noted that Talina, like the others in the room, did not seem in the least to feel that there was anything objectionable or untoward in this commerce in beauty. It was an accepted, ordinary part of the life of GOR. I wondered if, on my own planet, there was not a similar market, invisible but present, and just as much accepted. A market in which women were sold, except that they sold themselves, were themselves both merchandise and merchant. How many of the women of my native planet, I wondered, did not with care consider the finances, the property of their prospective mates? How many of them did not, for all practical purposes, sell themselves, bartering their bodies for the goods of the world? Here on GOR, however, I observed ironically, bitterly, that there was a clear division between merchandise and merchant. The girls would not collect their own profit, not on GOR.
Women be shopping of GOR.
Yeah. And then, probably the worst bit, Talina demands that he brands her as his property and weeps when he refuses. Yeah. And these, in Tal's own words, are the best days of his life. But fortunately, we don't have to dwell on this any longer either, as some dudes pile in and knock him out. Thank fuck for that. So he finds himself in a Tarn's nest. But wait, it's that assassin dude again, who tried it on in the cylinder back in Koro Bar. And we found out he is Parker. Master Assassin of R. And he's got news for Tal. Talina has played a swerve. She'll be his queen and rule by Parker's side, and she demanded that Tal face this brutal fate, to be tied up and taken by a wild Tarn. Oh no. And he does get taken by a Tarn, but of course his boss, Yarn, from earlier, rescues him and whisks him off to its nest, where he finds his gear, the homestone of R. What luck! And this all takes place over...
How convenient.
Yeah, this all takes place over several pages. Was Talina swinging the lead? Well, I hate to disappoint people and spoil the end, but no, she wasn't. She was just trying to give him a fighting chance. Tal and his fucking Tarn, take flight to return...
These names.
Yeah.
All these names.
Yeah. Tal takes his bird, not his bird, his bird.
His flying bird.
His flying bird. Tal takes his flying bird to return to Koro Bar, but en route is distracted by a bit of a kerfuffle with some lals. It's the first time we've heard of lals. And these are other beasties that are menacing someone in yellow. It's the Dark Oasis dude. He has come back, after all. But, well, there's got to be more to it than that, hasn't there? Because somehow, from the bent heap of rags that was a fellow human being, a hand reached up to me, the fingers crooked as though they might have been the claws of a chicken. Disregarding my misgivings, I took the hand to draw the unfortunate creature to his feet. I should point out, at this point, he's actually killed some of these lals and saved this guy, and it wasn't in any way exciting. To my amazement, the hand that clasped mine firmly was as solid and hardened as saddle leather. Before I realised what was happening, my arm had been jerked downward and twisted, and I had been thrown on my back by the feet of the man, who leaped up and set his boot on my throat. In his hand was a warrior's sword, and the point was at my breast. He laughed a mighty roaring laugh, ah ha 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 ha, and threw his head back, causing the hood to fall to his shoulders. I saw a massive lion-like head, with wild long hair, and a beard as unkempt and magnificent as the crags of the Voltaire itself. The man, who seemed to leap into gigantic stature as he lifted himself into full height, took from under his yellow robes a Tarn whistle and blew a long, shrill note. Almost instantly, the whistle had been answered by other whistles, responding from a dozen places in the nearby mountains. Within a minute the air was filled with the beating of wings. Some 100 wild Tarnsmen brought their birds down upon us. I am Marlenus, Ubar of R, said the man. Does that seem like a bit of an elaborate trap? Is it even a trap?
It does.
It's a bit weird.
Pretend to be a leper, and they'll grab him, and then then we'll get jumped by hundreds of wild townsmen with their birds.
Yeah. And why is he fucking about in a valley getting menaced by lals just in case Tal Cabot flies overhead on his tarn? I don't really get it. But we do actually get followed up with an interesting chapter, probably the second best chapter in the book after the Now the Spider chapter, where it almost feels like, I don't know, at this point, Norman seems to be really invested in Marlenus as a character. And Marlenus does do a lot of philosophizing about the nature of control and central government, but it's not as dry or boring, and it's a little bit more briskly written. He's not exactly a well-drawn character, but by this book's standards, he's fairly interesting. And he has this philosophy on how to stop the cycles of bloodshed and unite the cities under one rule. And of course, Tal said, but whose rule? Whose sword? Because he says, the rule of the sword. Whose sword? Well, he agrees. The Ubar agrees. He says, well, my sword. And Tal, up till now, has generally nodded and thought about the Gorean way of doing things and had accepted, kind of got into it, particularly the sex slave stuff. But now he decides to argue back. Now he's got a problem with some Gorean philosophy of government.
When I was reading this book, when I got to this chapter, when it got to the point where Marlenus is like, this world which GOR just seems to be run by very Nietzschean ideals of the strong dictate who rules.
Yeah.
And then you have Marlenus who goes, actually, I want to build a society of law and order and common decency. And Tal goes, aha, but you've not succeeded, have you? Because everyone's stronger than you. And Marlenus goes, it's a fair cop.
Yeah.
This was the point where I kind of said to myself very loudly, this book.
Well, the brilliant thing is, I suppose, that whilst he can blithely accept slavery as a given, the concept of central rule is like, fuck no.
The concept, it's the meme where it's the comic meme where someone says, I feel we should improve society somewhat, and then you have the guy saying, but you live in a society. I'm very smart. And I'm like,
it also made me think about something else I'd read, that later in his life, John Norman has self-identified as a libertarian.
Of course he does.
Yeah. So this idea that Tal is in many ways is a very modern American hero, isn't he? He's absolutely fine with the oppression of women, but you know what? Don't tread on me, man.
He's all for big government when it affects the people he doesn't like, but when they ask him to pay more than his fair share of taxes, revolt.
I suppose the good news about this chapter is that after fighting off a pending impalement in classic fantasy novel hero fashion, which is actually a first for Tal, he finds that Marlenus offers him a quick death, because what they want to do is they want to pull him apart from all four limbs. They call it the tarn death, which is like the old thing of attaching each limb to a different horseman and then turn you to bits. But Marlenus offers him a quick death and offers to strangle him. And he says, why would you do that? He says, well, for the love of a woman. She loves him after all. So, her swerve is already dispensed with in the space of a couple of short chapters. So he's delighted. She loves him after all. She was genuine when she said she wanted to be branded by him. He's delighted, but still gets tied.
Life is worth living.
Absolutely. He still gets tied to 4 towns to be ripped apart anyway, but it all works out, of course. Long story short, he reunites with his tarn and heads for her, knowing that when Talina said she wanted to be his property, by God, she meant it. Oh, what a day. What a day for him. So, of course, now he's bound to get some loving on. And we get several pages of descriptions of R's infrastructure and defences, all of which is really, really boring. But we do find out that slave girls carry coins in their gobs because GOR just doesn't do pockets. unless he points out you're an artisan. Some artisans have them on their aprons.
That may have been like the best bit of world building of GOR we had, but also the dumbest.
Yeah, it's just the way it's written.
I think I texted around and going, okay, so GOR doesn't have pockets. This is an established piece of world building. Also, God, hygiene of carrying coins in your gob.
I stopped a hurrying slave girl and inquired the way to the compound of Mintar of the merchant caste, confident that he would have accompanied the horde back to the heartland of R. The girl was not pleased to be delayed on her errand, but a slave on GOR does not wisely ignore the address of a free man. She spit the coin she carried in her mouth into her hand and told me what I wanted to know. Few Gorean garments are deformed by pockets. An exception is the working aprons of artisans. Incredible.
John Norman hates pockets. That's what I've decided.
Yeah, you know what? Fuck pockets. Fuck pockets. Fuck pockets and female emancipation. Just get rid of it.
As someone who works in customer service, if people pay for their shopping by just coughing up the money right in front of me, I'd get another job.
Yeah, you'd need a lot of hand wash. To be fair, we spent the weekend in Cleethorpes and Phil spent a lot of time on the 2p machines. And having seen the colour of our hands after working the 2p machines and the amount of hand wash she had to use to get rid of the coin muck, it doesn't sound very healthy to me. It sounds like a health and safety nightmare. But anyway, on a positive note, again, the merchant caravan of Mintar is in town. So Tal makes for it and reunites with his BFF Lazrak of the Port of Car. And rather sweetly, Lazrak, even though he only knew him for about 37 minutes, weeps to see him alive and reveals that he spent days searching for his body. Oh, how sweet. And Tal almost weeps himself with relief at being reunited with his mate. All seems a bit forced. Sorry, Tal, I'm not buying it. But they're going to see Mintar, and he's playing some form of chess that we get far too much detail about. But he's playing chess with Marlenus. And long story short, they're all sort of mates now. And Tal convinces Marlenus that he should take back the city from Parkour or something. I got confused as to who was attacking the city and who was besieging the city and who had what. It was all a bit weird. But the idea is that Marlenus will engage in battle with Parkour, and Tal will go to rescue Tarlina. We're rattling to an exciting conclusion now. I say rattling. We get about 7 pages describing the Siege of R. How on earth you can describe an extensive battle for a city at the climax of a book and it be so fucking dull is incredible. Because Tal's not involved in it. We don't get anything from Marlenus' point of view. We don't get anything from Kazarak's point of view. We just get this really weird, dry description of tunnels, walls, warrens, siege towers, but none of the visceral action gets any description whatsoever. It is like reading a history book, a really fucking dry history book. But we get to the action part. Tal somehow blags his way in to see the Ubar-S in waiting, which he thinks is going to be Talina because she's going to be Parkour's queen, in a cage. But, oh God, it's not her. It's a trap. There is a woman in the cage, but it's not Talina. It's all a big trap.
You've managed to gloss over how Marlenus is really obsessed with throttling his daughter to death.
Yeah.
In this part of the book, I
forgot about that. There is a passage, isn't there, where he says, well, if I find her, I'll kill her. And Tal says, well, I'll kill you. He says, oh, well, if I find her, I'll throw her to some birds or something. He says, well, I'll kill you then. And, yeah, I think it's supposed to be an amusing exchange. But Marlenus is like, well, you know what? She got jiggy with a free man, so she's dead to me. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, not exactly an exciting conclusion that we're getting.
No. And
actually, just because this book is fucking irritating at every turn, it's not even a trap. He turns up, he blags his way into this place, finds the cage, turns out it's not Talina, and then he just wanders off again, disappointed. He wanders off disappointed. Of course, the dramatic choice would have been that he then, Parkour's assassins jump in the room and go, aha, fooled you. But we don't get any of that. The next chapter starts, I had been outwitted by the brilliance of Parkour. It was with a heart filled with bitterness that I left the compound of the assassin and returned to Kazrak's tent. In the next few days, frequenting the paga tents and markets, I sought, by cornering slaves and challenging swordsmen, to learn the whereabouts of Talina. So the siege goes on for another 20 days. So we've got this exciting build. It's like, I found her. Oh no, it's not her. Nope. Where's the fucking trap? Where's Parkour springing the trap? Where's the excitement? Where's the fighting? No, we get pages and pages and pages more of this dry description of the siege. We get Marlenus gets captured. We get 3 pages of descriptions of how Gorean diplomacy and negotiations work. The initiates of the priest kings of GOR decide that Marlenus and all his family should be impaled. Parkour is like, oh yeah, all right, whatever, sure. So Tal goes on a violent rescue bender, something he should have done 1 million pages ago, and everything's resolved. And then, because this is a Thin John Carter clone, albeit with added rapiness, Tal suddenly gets transported back to Earth to sulk, but now he might be functionally immortal or something. The end.
Kind of rushed that.
Yeah. Was I missing any detail that wasn't boring as fuck?
No, like when they save the day, he then he flies her up in his tarn and tears her clothes off to to show his dominance,
Yeah.
as was promised earlier in the book. And then in the space of a paragraph break, he's back in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So it's like, at least with A Princess of Mars, it ends with a proper cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Like he gets sent back to Earth thinking that Deja Forest is dying of oxygen starvation.
Yes.
And you get a real sense of like like actual momentum, and just
there are some stakes.
There are stakes, like, it's implied that all this was set in motion of the Priest Kings, and then the Priest Kings didn't like him, so he gets sent back by spaceship. No, by magic.
Yeah. I've been very, very critical of this book, but I'm still endlessly disappointed by it.
Yeah. It's like, you want something, with all you hear about GOR, you want something that kind of, even if it's distasteful, you want something that lives up to the reputation.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly it. Why is something so crap so controversial? And these sold in huge, huge numbers. And, Norman himself has written long, rambling letters castigating his publisher, castigating the science fiction and fantasy writers establishment for essentially casting him out. And it's perfectly possible that the reason these books don't carry any resonances anymore is because they're so dated. And actually, this book is... People say that John Norman's a poor writer, and they're poorly written. I don't think they are poorly written. I just think his choices are questionable.
I think this one is just very dry. Like, Tal Cabot as a character has no character. No. You have no sense of who he is, or what really drives him beyond just completing the quest.
Yeah. The most interesting thing about the end, before he ends up back in New Hampshire, is that he and Talina are, I think it's referred to as free companions.
Yeah.
So hopefully she can take her collar off. Whether she still wants to be branded or not, I guess, would have to read more books, and I'm probably not going to do that.
No.
I do have a slightly perverse fascination with checking out Captive of GOR, which sounds horrendous, but I don't want to hate myself for having given it the time of day.
I once briefly owned a copy of Dancer of GOR,
yeah,
which is about a mild-mannered librarian who practices belly dancing in the library when it's closed. That's from like the first chapter, and then she ends up on GOR by, I don't know, magic.
Yeah.
And, I'm assuming GOR stuff happens.
Yeah. That sounds similar to Captive of GOR, the difference being that the protagonist in that is a wealthy, well-to-do Earth woman who is sexually in control of her own experiences. Independent, I suppose we would phrase it these days.
Can't have that.
Exactly. Yeah, and that seems to be the thrust of that novel. So I think that's enough of Talisman of GOR. But as a bonus feature, we watched the Golan Globus canon film of Talisman of GOR. Canon Films, that legendary production company who were rampant in the 80s and made lots of Chuck Norris films and lots of Charles Bronson films, the company behind the Death Wish movies, the company behind Delta Force, Ninja films. They were a force of nature who actually, whilst they created a lot of crap, created some of my favourite movies because they were just so gonzo and so wild and out there. They did a GOR film in 86 or 87, and we watched it. What were your notes on the canon GOR movie?
I don't know if you got this, but the Tal completely sucks. Like, he's a bumbling oaf for like 80% of the film.
Yeah.
You see him trying to pick up his teaching assistant for a wild weekend. I don't know if it's another teacher or a student at the university who's basically bullying him.
Yeah, I was really confused by that.
and he's like this mild-mannered, nebbish type who wears glasses,
Yeah.
who then just gets magically teleported to GOR,
Yeah.
gets involved in the rebellion against Oliver Reed, who plays the villain,
Yeah.
and proceeds to screw up for about 70% of the movie
That's right.
until the film decides, okay, he's a badass
Yeah,
now.
he's competent now. Yeah.
Yeah, and becomes the hero.
I unironically love this film. I love it because it contains everything I love in a canon movie. It's mostly ADR'd, so everybody's dubbed, so it comes across like an Italian or Spanish horror, Lucio Fulci horror film from the 70s or 80s, because I mean, the jock who's bullying him, whether that jock is another professor or not, is never really made clear. It's a really badly dubbed early appearance for Arnold Vosloo, who would go on to be the Mummy, which I didn't pick up on until the second time I watched it.
The 90s.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I did not recognize him at all.
Well, you wouldn't know for two reasons. One, he's got hair, and two, he's terribly dubbed with a really bad actor doing an American jock bully's voice. So it's got lots and lots of things. So it's like, first of all, what's out? What's out from the book? Well, Tarns, because they can't do giant flying birds. There's no Now the Spider, because there's no budget for monsters. There's no swamps. There's no other beasties. There's no Thalarians. There's no Lals. Tal's dad is nowhere to be seen. That whole subplot about the letter. And funny enough, we didn't comment on that. No spaceship.
He has the ring. The ring is, I think, the ring is like a home part of a homestone.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
so
magically
there's some kind of tie to GOR for him. There are no overt musings or philosophizing on sex and natural versus unnatural slaves, which is a relief. Tal is an idiot and is incompetent and bumbling, but he's not a dick, and he doesn't buy into the slave economy and have a great time with it all, which is great. What's in? Well, shonky ADR, quarries, sand, dust, impractical helmets, lots of posing pouches, massive 80s backcombed hairdos, which is a canon staple. We get an early example of a pretty great, inverted commas, chick fight, which is where Paul L. Smith, the original Beast Raban, turns up to do Paul L. Smith things. It's always good fun watching Paul L. Smith chew up the screen. That thing that's become a staple of modern action movies since possibly, arguably the greatest of all time in Total Recall, the chick fight in Total Recall. But this is a pretty early one, but others have been longer, sure, but whatever. Quite enjoyed that one. Comically proportioned swords, a more standard fish out of water arc for Tal Cabot, which is, a bit more 80s. And of course, Oliver Reed chewing it up, being
Oliver
amazing.
Reed was great.
Yeah.
Like this, I really don't like to make jokes about people's issues with substance abuse, but you have to wonder if Oliver Reed was paid by the pint for this film.
Oh, Oliver Reed is, he's probably 30 pints in every scene that he's in this movie. In his own way, he's sleepwalking, but when Oliver Reed is sleepwalking, he's fucking giving it everything anyway. And the bits where he's macking on extras.
Oh, there's the bit where he's like stroking like the slave girl. Then he turns to like the oiled muscular guy and then gently caresses his nipple.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm
equal opportunity macker.
He's committed.
Yeah, he's giving it everything. And I can only imagine that for the people who worked on that film, just being in the presence of Oliver Reed at that stage in his career where decent opportunities have dried up for him, and he's just appearing in crap straight-to-video films. Often he turns up he'll be on the cover or on the poster of a movie, and he'll be in it for 2 minutes.
Do you know what the best part is? Oliver Reed's probably watching this orgy going on, and he's probably thinking, I was in the fucking Devils. This is tame.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is tame by sheer comparison.
Yeah. And he actually, when he's during that period in the 80s where he's always pissed, this is not that long probably before, it's only 3 or 4 years after this that he's pissed up on the Word, appearing on the Word. His career is in the doldrums, is mocked and just generally considered to be a past it drunk who only does shit films. He's like a slightly better Cameron Mitchell by this point in his career. He's fucking brilliant in this. And he gets screen time because when I talked to Robbo about Wheels of Terror, we talked about the Wheels of Terror film, the straight-to-video Wheels of Terror film. The poster, massive poster. Oliver Reed, David Carradine, massive. The main cast of the movie, small at the bottom. Oliver Reed is in it for like 45 seconds at the very end, and there was a lot of that going on in the 80s. But he actually gets some decent screen time in this film.
Oh yeah,
and he gets to be properly seedy, which I always appreciate.
I've only seen him in one other film, which is like this '60s Hammer film called These Are the Damned, where he plays a young teddy boy. If you ever get the chance to see it, it's one of Hammer's few forays into SF.
Yeah,
it involves like tests on like nuclear exposure to children.
Ooh.
And it's bleak. It is a really bleak film.
Yeah,
but it's that early black and white Hammer, so it's very much in that style of like X the Unknown.
Yeah.
And the first two Quatermass films.
Yeah, you have to remind me what that is again after we're finished, because I will forget. I'll look that up, because he was great in the early days. Even through to the 70s, he was doing a lot of weird genre movies that kind of flew under the radar. He's in a TV movie of a Lovecraft short story that I think was finished by August Derleth called The Shuttered Room. And he plays one of the local like ne'er-do-wells. And he's just so fucking intense. You know, all he really has to do is rock up and be intense. And he was in some kitchen sink dramas in the 60s, and one of which, the name of which I forget, but I got it on a BFI Blu-ray. And he's absolutely fantastic in that. It's not...
I forget he was in Oliver.
Yes, of course. He was the ultimate Bill Sykes.
He plays Bill Sykes. I always forget, because I'm always just mesmerized by Harry Seacombe's fantastic singing voice.
Yeah.
In that movie.
Yeah. He's absolutely incredible as Bill Sykes. He's fucking terrifying. He's effortlessly terrifying in that film. And quite apart from anything else, a lot of people disregard that film because they saw it on TV, pan and scan, when they were kids, and they just remember the songs. But that is a really menacing, scary film. All of the scenes in London where you've got all of the the wooden slat pathways over the mud between the buildings, and the production design and everything, and the relationship between him, Nancy, it's terrifying. And if you ever get a chance to watch that like in HD, in full widescreen, that is an incredible movie when it comes to stuff like production design and direction. Absolutely amazing film. And he's brilliant in it. Yeah. And of course, the other thing that we get post Oliver Reed is, in a way, the very, very opposite of what we get with Oliver Reed is we get Jack Palance turn up at the end just to set up the sequel. And Jack Palance really does look like he's like turned up and read his script like 30 seconds before and just does a classic. Yeah. You know, he's not in Heartless Lair's a shit film, but at least Jack Palance is super into that and having a great time. In this, he turns up, he puts his impractically large hat on and he delivers some lines, and then, you know, we get the sequel 2 years later, which I've got to say, as much as I really enjoy this film for being a perfect canon cheesy fantasy fest, the second one is fucking terrible.
I saw the second one years ago.
Yeah.
So when he just kind of teleports to GOR, I have thought that he just magically transports to GOR. It's a general rule. So when I was reading the book and he ends up on a fucking spaceship, my mind was kind of blown because I was not expecting that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jack Palance is like, he's in the film. He's taking the money.
Yeah.
He's taking the money and running away from Italy as fast as he can.
Yeah.
He's no Oliver Reed.
No, and even though the first one is a canon movie, so it's obviously not made on a massive budget, because it's made in Italy, you still got fairly big lavish scenes with lots and lots of extras. At times, it's actually quite a good-looking film when it's not just four people wandering through a desert.
The score is fantastic.
Score is brilliant.
The score was the best part of the film, honestly.
Yeah, I think in its own way, it's a good 80s canon movie. The sequel is really bad. It's really cheap.
Yeah.
It's the comedy sidekick character is absolutely unwatchable because, of course, they decided to give him a comedy sidekick who travels with him from Earth to GOR, and it's just fucking terrible.
Oh, I thought you meant his the comedy sidekick he picks up on GOR, who is the what is the correct term these days?
Small person.
The small person. Thank you.
Yeah. No. In the second GOR movie,
no, I
his
remember
annoying mate from the university travels with him.
Smith.
It's
And then
so terrible. It's so ill-judged.
and he accidentally warps himself back.
Yeah.
And now he's killed a bunch of people. He just punches the guy who was bullying him at the start of the film, and the TA immediately switches allegiances.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like, oh, yep, she is traded over like arm candy in one of those old weightlifting comics, which I think Steve Allen?
Yeah. He punches out Arnold Vosloo and wins the girl because now he's a Gorean man. He's of the warrior caste, and he's not going to take no nonsense from Arnold Vosloo. We've already talked about to what degree would we bother to see if the reputation of these books is worthy of rehabilitation, given that, they're kinky, 50 Shades of Grey kind of made a lot of this stuff more open and access. I don't know. It's not for me. It'd entail me reading more of these books, and I cannot be asked.
I belong to the school of thought, which I picked up from my wife. If you're going to enjoy porn, enjoy good porn.
Yeah.
So, I don't really, if I want to enjoy good erotica of this variety, I'm going to go to like my local independently owned feminist bookshop and go, right, recommend me your best smut.
The weird thing about this book, though, and I understand it may change in later books, I really don't know because I'm not going to read them, is that there is no explicit sex.
No.
It's all just dodgy attitudes.
It's just kind of inferred and implied.
I don't know. I won't be reading anymore, I don't think, unless, as I say, I kind of out of perverse curiosity decided to see just how bad Captive of Gore really is. But when I was having a quick check-up to see if the film version of Outlaw of Gore was around, I've got the German Blu-ray of Gore. I got it a couple of years ago, and it's got Outlaw of Gore or Gore 2 as a DVD extra, so it's not restored, it's not HD, but it's got it as a DVD. But I can't find it. And online I could only find a Mystery Science Theatre episode with it in. But I found a perspective on the Outlaw of Gore novel on a description for a torrent of the audiobook of Outlaw of Gore. And this is quite interesting. It says, from the perspective of the Gorean philosophy developed by Norman, Outlaw of Gore is clearly the most important of the early novels. The novel was written in 1967, a time when the feminist movement was beginning to take shape, and it's easy to read it as something of a response to the times that were a-changing. A city run by women is seen as being unnatural, and Norman begins to expand on some of the key elements of the Gorean philosophy, the concept of honour, the importance of the homestone, the dangers of technology versus respect for the environment. Okay, so far not terrible. And the independence of men and the truth of female slavery.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
no.
So, no, not for me.
No, you almost had me. You almost tricked me. I was honestly very close. As I said, there was a point where I said, fuck this book. 5 minutes before that, I got to that part of the book, I was scrolling eBay going, all right, can I find a Del Rey edition with the Vallejo cover for Outlaw of... Oh, no, I'm good.
Yeah, don't do it. And
don't do it.
I didn't do a whole lot of research, but I was looking for the GOR trailer, so I could just extract the audio from it and pop it into this podcast at some point. And I could only find it in German. Well, I might do that anyway, because I think GOR dubbed in German would be equally entertaining. But on YouTube, there are people out there engaging in discourse about GOR, John Norman Lang, and whether he was ill-treated by the mainstream. And one of the most viewed examples that popped up when I was just looking for the trailer was presented by a guy. I was instantly put off because it was presented by a guy who bemoaned his shadow banning. Good God, here we go. And within a minute used the term leftist. So I checked out.
I think I saw this very video.
Yeah, I checked out very quickly. Shadow banning was the first thing. It was like, before we get into this, I just want to talk about my shadow banning. It's like, oh God. And then he referred to the
cancel culture of GOR.
And, we've already said John Norman Lang himself in later life has self-identified as libertarian and has just broadly spent time shouting at the publishing and fantasy writer establishment in very long letters about being essentially cancelled. I just can't pluck up the enthusiasm to go further down a rabbit hole for something like this, even
No.
if there was any entertainment value in it. Yeah, I don't know. I guess that's GOR. That's GOR for Breakfast in the Ruins. Well, you know what?
GOR.
Thanks for putting yourself out there and enduring this with me.
Fun. I'll be honest, I have not hate read a book in quite like COVID and family health issues made me put a lot of things in perspective. One of those was I really don't want to force myself to read a book I'm clearly hating just for the fun of it anymore. So you know what? Does this count as a one shit book?
I think had he avoided one of his worst predilections, which was filler and dry bullshit, this could have been a one-shit book. This could have been 70 pages long, or even 100 pages long, and it would have been a one-shit book. It would have doubled as one-shit book as well. And to be fair, the only one-shit book we've done previously, and I mean, you could make arguments that we've covered many one-shit books, but the only one we've formally addressed as a potential one-shit book was Daenus, the Dark Straits of Reglathium. And that was, once again, far too long, suffered from a lot of the same problems. But in Tarnsman of Gore's defence, it didn't have 5 typos on every single page and at least one sentence that made no grammatical sense every 3 pages. And it didn't have a glossary of stupid terms at the end, which littered the book. So from that perspective, it was a much easier book to read than The Dark Straits of Reglathium. But from the point of view of his other predilections, which is all of the bullshit, I can't say I hated this book, but it's just I don't know. I think disappointing is probably the wrong word.
Yeah, it was just kind of, in a way, almost kind of boring.
Yeah, it was very dull.
Because you want, I'm a simple guy at heart. Sometimes you just want like 20-page fight scenes, like one guy just mowing through tons and tons of palace guards and intrigue. All the intrigue takes place off the page.
Yeah.
And I think he gets into like 3 fights, wins 2 of them, and just keeps getting knocked out and captured and escaping and musing about the natures of slavery.
There's I would say 50% of the Doctor Who style cliffhangers. You get into the following chapter and it follows through as a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
But the other half of the cliffhangers don't follow through as cliffhangers at all. You just start the next chapter and he just wanders off, sulk, because something didn't quite work out for him. And there is no dramatic tension.
No.
At all. And you know what? This is John Norman's first novel, perhaps. I don't know if he wrote any other books before this. And he wrote 33 more, or however many it was. And, these books may well, whilst the misogyny and dodginess ramps up, maybe the talent for writing something dramatic and interesting and exciting ramps up as well. I just can't be bothered to find out, and I'm not going to bother.
No.
But it's interesting.
Like or a Corm book where something happens, even if Corm is dicking about in a boat for a chapter, when he gets off the boat, he's going to be attacked by a big nasty monster.
But even when he's dicking about on a boat, it's all killer, no filler.
Yeah.
There is absolutely no fat in a Moorcock book. And this is all so much flab in this. So much. And as a flabby guy myself, I'm not dissing anybody with a touch of the poundage. But this book could easily lose 70% of its timber and not really suffer for it.
It's so flabby you can call the book Vernon Manning.
Yeah. And similarly poor attitudes as well. Well, you know what? Thank you for suffering through it with me. Next time, maybe we'll do something good. No promises, though.
No promises.
All right, Miles. Well, thanks again for dropping by Derry Toms to discuss Tarnsman of GOR. I'll catch you next time.
Yeah.
Massive thanks to Miles for humouring me, and not only slogging through Tarnsman of GOR, but having enough goodwill left over afterwards to join me in Derry Toms and talk about it. Now, let's never speak of it again. And thanks as always to our patrons. First, those without tier: Anthony Piconti, Tim Cardos, Dave Dempster, and Sebastian Weetabix. And our chaos engineers: Andrew Cicluna, Andrew Van Ness, Anthony Porter, Benjamin Fletcher, Brandon Mays, Craig Ledley, Dave Griffiths, Dave Voxman, Gabriel Laycock, Harvey Faulkner Aston, Jim Kirkland, Jim Knight, John W. Lays, Jules Lawrence, Mal Pertwee, Mary Catherine, Matt Saltz, Menion, Nelbert, Paul McRandall, Scott Butler, Simon Perrins, and Tony Milazzo. And thanks, of course, to our crafty jugaderos: Alexander Harris, Loz, Taylor, Matthew Broom, Toby White, Mark Hebden, Graham Holden, and Ray Otis. And finally, of course, eternal thanks to our patron demons. First up, and brand new to the Don Blast, I'm delighted to welcome Alistair Davison. Alistair, many thanks for the support. You're an exalted company. As is tradition, I dropped Alistair a line to see what his history of Moorcock is and where he is in the world, and he sent this lovely reply. Hi Andy, your love and passion comes through on the podcast. I first listened to the War of the Worlds episode. That Jeff Wayne album was a pre-teen obsession of mine, and I've stuck around since. I'm liking what I'm hearing. Just finished the fascinating Biker Mania episode, and the interview with Oliver Brackenbury provided some much-needed inspiration for my novel writing. I've been an avid reader for as long as I can remember, and, although I devoured fantasy fiction throughout the 1980s, along with Target Doctor Who novels and various movie tie-ins, I never read any Moorcock. That was only remedied around 2019 when I picked up a copy of The History of the Runestaff and loved it. I promised myself I'd get more when my to-read pile became of less interest to King Kong, but that still hasn't happened. Best not mention the huge pile of Grafton Moorcocks that were offered to me for a song around 10 years ago. No regrets? Not likely. I'm still kicking myself. I'm based in the northeast of England, a town called Washington between Newcastle and Sunderland, where I've lived for most of my 53 years. I was an avid RPGer back in the day, my group's adventures often forming the basis of stories that would never see the light of day. Books were, and still are, my passion. There's nothing better than trawling through a second-hand bookshop in search of an old favourite that was foolishly cast aside when I first moved out of my parents' house. I have a fondness still for David Gemmell's work, and, along with the likes of Brian Lumley and the earlier works of Clive Barker, 1980s Marvel comics have struck a chord with me lately too. I hope I haven't rambled on too much. Thanks for the podcast. It's genuinely warmed my heart and I'm looking forward to episodes old and new. P.S. I love the beer reviews too. Thanks for that, Alistair. It fair warmed me cockles. As it happens, the next show in line for editing is part 2 of The Sword of the Dawn, so we're just about 3/4 of the way through the History of the Runestaff reread. Watch out for that in a couple of weeks. And you're not the first patron to highlight David Gemmell. Our mucker Paul Hillary is in the same camp, and at some point I think we'll have to cover one of his. And further thanks to Andy Darby, Clarky the Cruel, David Lee, Fred Quiche, Gareth Wilson, Greg Faulkner, Gwen Barlow, Ian Stead, thanks Ian, I'll buy you a pint or two in Morecambe, Imria, Jenny Stim, Jay Reeser, Joe Monty, Jason Vogel, and Lee Gary. Lee dropped me a line to tell me possibly the best thing I've ever heard in reference to Michael Moorcock. Lee said, "For your enjoyment, I have a story to share. Many years ago, on the Moorcock Miscellany page, I asked Mike if I could name my homemade hot sauce Tannerlawn Tea. He responded and said I could use that name. I didn't expect a response, so I was completely amazed and delighted. Tannerlawn Tea. That sounds awesome, Lee. But onwards with the gratitude. Thanks to Liam J. Miles Reed-Labato, of course. I'm so sorry, Miles. Mort Main, Neil Burton, Paul Hillary, Randall Gatlin, Steve Round, Tom Murphy, the OG patron Norman Beresford, and last, but never least, Robert McMillan. Okay, enough yakking from me. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram with the handle @BreakfastRuins. You can email us at breakfastruins@outlook.com. The webpage is breakfastintheruins.com. BITR Breakfast at the Ruins Radio is live on Radio Garden via liveradio.co.uk or the web player at breakfastintheruinsradio.blogspot.com. We have our Patreon page too, and there are a few extra odds and sods on there. But for now, take care, stay safe, and we will meet again soon on the Moonbeam Roads.